We are living in an artificially induced state of consciousness that resembles sleep. The poor and the underclass are growing. Racial justice and human rights are non-existent. We have been lulled into a trance. They have made us indifferent to ourselves, to others. We are focused only on our own gain. That is their primary method of survival. Keep us asleep, keep us selfish, keep us sedated.
You're listening to Toward Anarchy on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Here's your host, Michael Storm.
Toward Anarchy, I am your host, Michael Storm. Thank you so much for joining me, and it must be, I'm here live, or at least I feel like I am anyway, on a Sunday afternoon, 1 p.m. Central Time. Every Sunday right here on the Republic Broadcasting Network, my home away from home, as it were, my digital home where all my digital friends hang out. It's great to be back. It always is every weekend just to get to come here and do this, and I'm glad that you share it with me, and I know that you appreciate it because I get things like thank you cards in the mail. That's really, really cool. People just respecting and appreciating the I don't know what little work I put into the show, I guess. I mean, it's not a lot of work. It's just being me. And that's all I come here to do is just be me. Talk about the things that I'm doing, talk about the world the way that I see it. And the way that I see it is not influenced by a whole lot of other people and a lot of other people's ideas. And I pride myself in that. And it can be kind of a pain sometimes when people want to push their ideas on you, but they don't really have their own ideas, so they can't put the things into their own words, and they just sort of copy and paste the same thing over and over again and try to get you to see their point of view, and it's real tough to see that for yourself when you're someone who tries to make good arguments. You know, when you try to provide yourself with enough information, enough fact, and enough understanding of what the words mean and what the numbers are and how they apply in a particular situation to make an argument about something using your own words and not just making a cut and paste argument placed by somebody else that oftentimes has already been dismissed. That's the problem with it. And I'll get into that a little bit more here in a minute. In the meantime, go to towardanarchy.com, and as always, you can follow along. You'll see it's October 25th that you're looking for if you need to dive into the archive, if it's not just right there on the front page. And you'll see my guest is Bradley Thomas. He's back on the show again, one of my favorite people now, absolutely by far. We'll talk about a lot of things, but we will definitely talk about police and policing and those numbers. I've shared his article a time or two over the last month or so. I guess it's been about 2 months since the article came out, about 2 months, I guess, since the last time he was here. And this article had great information in it about numbers, just sort of looking at the numbers, the facts of police and policing. And I thought some of the stuff was kind of important and is really telling. And so we'll talk about that, but we'll talk about a bunch of other stuff too. We'll talk about economics. There's definitely an economic thought on my mind today, and we'll get into that here. Also, this is one of those reasons. Federal Reserve Chairman Powell lays out the key reasons why they're moving towards a digital dollar. That's one of the articles that you'd find up there if you go to October 25th at towardanarchy.com and see what I have in store for the show. As always, I put the links and everything up there. Just a quick mention, Matthew Wojtecki, author of Brushfire, is on the show next week. And I have another copy of his book to give away today, so we'll do that a little bit later in the show. That'll be fun. People really enjoying the book. Great feedback on it, or early feedback on it. And there's people that just cracked it, and everybody, the same story that we all have is we all about 3 or 4 books in, and that it's on the list, and just like me, I'm sure opened up the first few pages. It's a dense tome. Brushfire's a thick book. There's a lot of ideology and a lot of story in there, and it's all interwoven in together in a modern day technological thriller. You know, they're talking about cryptocurrencies and hacking and secure messaging and all the. It's some of the things that we're interested in here around here when we talk about, and just sometimes a little bit more detailed than other times. It can just be so boring talking about some of the tech stuff if you end up getting into the minutia of how it works and why it does what it does instead of just enjoying it and accepting it for what it is and just you end up talking tech nerd stuff is what happens. Foster Gamble confirmed for the show next month. Also, Ram Dennison will be back on the show as well. So lots of great shows coming up. But the 25th is what you're looking for, October 25th. You'll see there the link to follow Bradley Thomas at Erase the State on Twitter. Erase State on Twitter. There's no "the" in there. But the website is erasethestate.com if you want to visit that website, support Bradley. Buy his book, Tweeting Liberty. That's that book of tweets that I've been reading. Just a great little... perfect for, I guess, what is it, 240 characters now? I don't know. The 240 character limited world, just these powerful little tweets that he makes out and gets other people to tweet and send out, and he has all these followers, and he's just done really well in that particular social media environment, and it's really great to have him want to come and be on the show and be a guest and hang out and talk. He's a contributor. I mean, he contributes to Zero Hedge and Lou Rockwell and the Mises Institute and the Libertarian Institute and the FEE, the Foundation for Economic Education. I mean, this is one of those guys who puts his money where his mouth is, or his words where his mouth is. He puts it, whatever it is, he puts it down on paper, and he makes a case for the way he sees the world. And being a person who does that himself, I really appreciate that, and it's great that he comes here and shares what he does with the show. Those links that I was talking about, that conversation that we'll have with Bradley about the sort of 80% of criminal charges that are filed by the court system are for misdemeanors or ultimately revenue generating, speeding tickets, otherwise traffic tickets, things like that, stuff that doesn't have an actual a victim, a real victim that you can point to and say they were a victim of this crime. Speeding is not one of those things. Most traffic violations aren't one of those things. There's a lot of little stuff like that puts police in contact with people on a daily basis, and it's sort of 80% or more of what they do that falls under that category outside of protection and service that they claim to offer to us. Anarchism. I would live in spite of the whole world, prisons, persecution, everything. Yes, even in spite of the condemnation of my own closest comrades, I would live my beautiful ideal. That was Emma Goldman. And again, the link to her is up there. Just because I share something by her doesn't mean I'm a communist. It doesn't mean that I believe or support every single thing she said. And this brings me around to, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I do want to talk about it because I think it's important. I was having some fun this week, and I've Agro'd the Agorists. Okay. If you don't know what the term agro or agorist is, let me explain them to you. First, agro is you draw the anger, the aggression. It's a video game term. It developed out of video game circles, and it's the big guy, the tank, as it were. That's another video game term. He's the big guy who runs up front and absorbs up all the damage, and everybody pays attention to him. He gets all the attackers' attention, so the rest of your group can attack them sort of behind, get the bonuses from attacking from behind when their attention is on something else, all these things. It's you getting the aggro. You're taking on the anger, the aggression of the enemy. And so I've angered the Agorists, and agorists are confused. That's what agorists are, I'm not trying to make enemies of agorists, but I want people to be honest in their communications and the words that they use, and it's important, especially if you're talking about trying to communicate a message and get somebody to accept the ideas that you're trying to put forth. Your communication must be clear, and if they have a different understanding of the words and the things that you are saying, especially when they are in relation to real-world action, you're going to have a problem convincing those people that your words are changing real-world action. And that's what I mean when I talk about the fact that agorists are confused. Agorism is an anarchist idea. It's like the anarchist farmer idea, like totally drop out of society kind of idea. It's a weird thing. They're very confused people, because I will have, and this is why I've been poking at them, and this is why they're aggroed, why they're angry at me. Is because one person who calls themselves an agorist will come to me and say, I support capitalism, I support free markets, I support voluntary trade. And voluntary exchanges, that's part of the definition of agorism. Except that also a part of the definition of agorism is counter-economics. And this is where it becomes important that the language you use actually makes sense. So this is part of the definition, and I guess I could just give you the definition. I wrote an article. If you're at towardanarchy.com, if you make your way there and you go to the article's link, it says, Dear Agorists, there is no such thing as counter-economics. And the argument is that the phrase counter-economics is just meaningless wordplay, because what the agorists still do is still economics. They use different tools. They may even practice it in different markets, as it were, but that's not even really true. But it's still economic activity, and that's my only argument, is that if one agorist comes to me and tells me that they support markets, but then the next one comes to me and says that he believes that money is evil, we have a problem, not with my understanding of agorism, but with your understanding of agorism, you, the person who claims to be an agorist. Because one person in your group is, and this is an economic thing, so don't dismiss this idea that what I'm saying here is wrong, because this is an economic idea. The anarcho-agorist ideology is counter-economics. It's in the definition, a social philosophy that advocates creating a society in which all relations between people are voluntary exchanges by means of counter-economics, engaging with aspects of peaceful revolution. That's the definition. And I don't know what that means to you, but that's complete word salad to me. That's an obnoxious, annoying modern phrase, but it's apt. Okay? It's word salad. A social philosophy, great, advocates creating a society in which all relationships between people are voluntary exchanges. Perfect. Doesn't need any clarification. But then it has clarification by means of counter-economics, proving that these people do not know what the word counter or economics means, either one of those words, because they're the engaging in aspects of peaceful revolution, whatever. That is, if you take just that part of it, by means of counter-economics engaging with aspects of peaceful revolution. So that's the opposite of the current model for conducting business, which is based on capitalism, which is the individual being the head decision maker of his own economic decisions, right? That's what capitalism is. And it's free markets, the ability to conduct capitalism in any way that they choose, the ability to decide how to spend their capital within whatever market they want. These are all functions of economics, and economics itself is a function of the individual. It's human action, or it's the science of understanding human action, to the actions that humans take to fulfill wants and needs. So the money or currency preferences, the market types, whether you call them traditional markets or whether they're quote unquote free markets, or whether they're black markets or gray markets. That's location. That's what that is. Even objective and subjective valuation of the items within the market are all subsets of economic functions. So if you're conducting any of those things in any way, regardless of what you're using or in what place you're doing it, you're still conducting economics. So the fundamental definition, the fundamental idea behind the agorist is counter-economics. It's right there in its definition, except that the idea of counter-economics is completely fallacious. It doesn't make any sense. Counter-economics is literally to do nothing, because everything the human does is about economics. It's about investment, and it's about the return that you get on it, whether it's your time you invest with your family or your job or with nature or with your tools or with your art or whatever it does. It's all an economic function, a balance of return on investment. And that's all I said. And I said it in so many words, about 800. I don't know how many I just used there. But this really angered the agorism crowd. And here's my problem is that if you go and look it up, it's a leftist ideology. It's, to me, counter-economics. You take that sentence that I pulled apart. Counter-economics, engaging with aspects of peaceful revolution. Revolution against what? A revolution against human interaction? Against economics, the science of understanding that human interaction? That doesn't make any sense to me. That's why it's complete word salad. And it's done that way on purpose, because this is the bottom line. Agorism is a place for confused people confused about economics, that they don't understand capitalism already entails what they purport to be doing with their functioning as themselves and being the own determinant of their economic functions and conducting it in the way they see fit. Those are not counter economics. That's just economics. So it's just this idea of counter economics is to introduce an anti-capitalist note to what we're talking about, the revolution against the way people conduct the economy now. Well, the majority of people conduct their economy, their economics, their business with everyone else in the world voluntarily. It's only when government is involved that we are forced to conduct business without a voluntary aspect to it. So the suggestion is by the agorists that every way but theirs is a coerced version of the economy, of economics, of how to voluntarily interact with other people in them or in any instance. And the reality is it's completely the opposite of that. Agorism is an escape from It's a safe space for people who have not been able to rectify capitalism and their own understanding of things like money and incorporation and private property. These are all things that, depending on which agorist you ask, they're going to have a different answer for you about what it means to agorism and what it means within agorism and whether or not it's acceptable to conduct within that agorist community. And so I'm not against the basic core idea of people and voluntary exchange. But no, when you tell me that you support an ideology, but you can't even tell me what your ideology means, and it uses word salad to describe itself to cover up the fact that it's a leftist euphemism for anti-capitalism, I'm going to call you out on it. Every single time. And I would use the word uppity, but I'm pretty sure that's a racist term now, that it's supposed to be associated with followed with another word that I won't say. And so I won't use that term. but that's what it is. It's these agorists, and this is what brought this on, that just think they're better than everybody else. It's this idea they just absolutely are certain that their way is better than everybody else's, except that you're not doing anything different than anybody else. It's an ideology that was formed in like 1975 by through an amalgamation by a leftist, through an amalgamation of existing ideologies that already weren't in conflict with each other. So anyway, there it is. Wow. We're going to take the break, and I'll come right back, and I'll reset myself right here on Toward Anarchy. It's on your phone, if it's on your computer or your tablet, whatever it is. Grab your browser and point it to towardanarchy.com. Look for October 25th. Bradley Thomas is my guest. He's coming up in just about 5 minutes or so, a little longer than that, especially with me talking in there and doing introductions and things like that. It'll definitely be drug out to more than 5 minutes, but he's here. He's waiting in the wings. I will grab, let me do this, give this to producer Ken before I forget. Here's a little phone number for you, sir, to give the man a call and get him on the line. Here we go. So we'll have Bradley Thomas. I've already been talking to him this morning. We're already set and ready to go. So he's waiting on the call. Bradley Thomas will be back. We'll talk about some police. We'll talk about economics. I'll ask him about the agorist thing. I'll be interested. He's a real economist. I know I'm not a real economist because I don't have a piece of paper that says I'm an economist. But that's not. I'm so mean. I've got to stop being mean like that. But it's hard because I try to take it out. I try to have a little bit of fun. I try to be honest at the same time, and it just doesn't pay off. We got this voting thing going on right now. Everybody's voting, and again, I'm caught in the middle of it. You're either voting or you're not voting, and of course, I'm caught in the middle of it because I don't vote, and I don't care if you vote. I don't look at it as a particular violation of me directly. I give you the benefit of the doubt, and I'll say it's your vote. Almost everybody votes defensively. That the voting, it's if it were a crime scene that somebody was looking at, and they were looking at the evidence, it would be defensive wounds all over your vote. That's what it would be. It would be you say, I got to have this guy because the other guy is just a complete fool. And this week there was it was hilarious because I just love seeing this. This is me sitting back and sort of laughing at the whole agorist thing. Believe me, I'm having fun. You guys should not be so upset about it. You should not be so upset about learning the real meaning of words and understanding how they apply to the actions and things that you do. But I've been caught in the middle of this voting thing, and then of course this week there was the last debate, I guess, before the big vote, and there's a certain group of people walking around strutting like peacocks, saying, "Who built the cages, Joe? Who built the cages, Joe?" And I just want to remind you that score, that burn that the one old white guy got over the other old senile white guy is not an excuse for continued use of the cages. Did we forget that? Was that an important point that somebody just went, oh, well, I guess kudos for the score, chalk one up for the orange guy versus the white guy. To me, it's laughable. The whole thing is just, I just sit back and laugh. And unfortunately, the laughter sometimes turns to tears because it's so sad at the same time to watch it. Everybody arguing and fighting, and the resolution is to put power and trust into a bunch of people who are arguing and fighting, and they're fighting in the stupidest, most childish ways. At least this last debate was somewhat more organized, and so somebody looked at the president and said, you may be right, but you're doing things in the wrong way, I suppose is probably what happened. Because you get me defending the president. It happens. What I defend is honest speak and honest analysis of the things that people say, and so once again, it just all ties together. It absolutely does. You can't have an ideology. You can't have, whether it's political or not, whether it's economic, whatever that ideology is, and then pretend like you know what it is and still use words and phrases that you know are in complete contradiction to the ideas and the ideology that you espouse. And worse than that is, and this is where I think the agorists come in, is that they don't have that sense of what's good for the goose is good for the gander. It's an anarchist problem. They want to be free themselves, but they don't care if you're free or not. And so because of that, they can actually find themselves pushing for things that don't fit their ideology. That's the only way that I can look at it, because I'm watching it. I'm witnessing it with my own eyes and my own ears. And this is the problem with it, right? You can't say you're something you're not when it's right there in writing, when it's right there in the words. And if you want to convince me of your opinion, if you want to change the way I think about something, you don't call me stupid. You don't piss all over my ideas and my work and then try to explain to me what you meant. And that's what's happening. And it's not just the agorists, and that's why I don't want them to hate me. But it just happened to be agorists this time. And it ties into the property rights thing and the money thing and all these things that we converse about all the time. So we'll get into some of these things, I imagine, with my guest, Bradley Thomas, who's coming up next right here on Toward Anarchy.
You are tuned in to the Republic Broadcasting Network. Visit our website by going to republicbroadcasting.org.
Okay, TowardAnarchy.com, that's the place to follow along. You're looking for October 25th. And it's really just make sure to like and share and follow. I put the links up there. It's real easy for you to do now, at least on the two major platforms. I actually went and asked some of the other platforms if they had buttons like that, and I was saddened by the response that I got from some of them. It was kind of like, who the hell do you think you are, asking us where we have buttons to share? It was the weirdest response. It was from one of the bigger new, I won't point out who it was. Just one of these other social media places that you can find people on. But make sure to like and share and follow along and subscribe wherever it is you're listening to the show at, wherever you're hearing us at across the network. And because that's how we are able to bring you a little conversation like this. Bradley Thomas is my guest today. He's coming back to the show. Of course, he's the creator of EraseTheState.com, one of the fantastic anarchist islands in the internet of information that's out there. He's an activist and an anarchist and a writer and an author. He's been published by the Libertarian Institute and LouRockwell.com and the Foundation for Economic Education and Zero Edge, and the list goes on and on. Mises Institute. I try to remember all of these guys, all these places he's done this amazing work for. But I'm as always, I'm glad to have Bradley back on the show. Thanks for joining me, my friend. It's good to talk to you again. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Michael. Yeah, thanks so much for having me back on again. Looking forward to another engaging discussion.
Yeah, my friend, anytime. You've become one of my favorite people here in a very short amount of time. You're principled and well spoken, and you're not afraid to go out on the limb and say the things that you say and mean them and stick by them when you do. And I just don't see that in enough people anymore. And when you take those things and you put them down in writing and put them out there for the whole world to see, and you just do it for free, and he'd say, here it is, take it, or most of it, just take it and do with you what you will. I mean, that to me, that's brave and it's important, and I'm happy to be able to share things like that. So it's my pleasure, absolutely, to have you on. Listen, let me beat you up a little bit on economics. I've been in this. I'm always in these conversations, but I've been in one this week, and it's about agorism, and it's about being sort of honest about the things that you believe in, and about use of certain words and what they mean in the reality in relation to actions, and so I don't want to taint your response to it, but tell me what you think about agorists and agorism. Give me your impression as an actual trained economist.
Yeah, well, my best understanding is the motivation towards that is to really carve out a niche in your life where you can engage in economic activity that's largely outside the purview of the state, outside the regulations and other sorts of taxation, to avoid that as much as possible, which is obviously much more easier said than done with the Leviathan state. So from an economic perspective, I think there's just a seeking of some freedom from government interventions and trying to find some of those corners of the economy where you can actually engage in some of this activity without the heavy hands of the state and of the government reaching in. So, there's certainly something to be said for that longing for people to be free. And I'm certainly not going to discourage anybody from trying to engage in that. But I think also, I think it's important to spread the message to try to roll back as much as the state as possible so that more and more of our economic choices can be made without the heavy hand of the state. So, let's all become agorists by rolling back the state itself.
Thank you so much. I really wanted that response without having to hand feed you that response, because that was my impression of it too. And so when I agro'd the Agorists this week, I was kind of upset about it, because I really was just pointing out that the term counter economics is not it's word salad. It doesn't really mean anything. And you said it within 2 seconds of describing agorism. You said it was finding a way to conduct economic activity outside of the state's purview. And so that is absolutely right. 100% absolutely right. It's still conducting economic activity. And that was my point in talking with these people and trying to get them to be honest about what it is that they say they believe. Because I would ask this happened to me over the course of this last week. I would ask one agorist what it is that they believed, why they called themselves an agorist. And they would say they were free market capitalists. And I would ask the next agorist something, and he would say that money is evil, or he would say that property rights don't exist, or the next one would say that corporations, incorporation and contracts and things like that are invalid, or that hierarchies don't exist. And I'm just like, oh my God, you people, do you talk to each other?
Yeah, going a lot of different directions there. I think I would definitely. I think it's definitely a little bit confusing if they are talking about perhaps property rights not existing. I would say that a big motivation, at least in my understanding, a big motivation for a lot of agorists is that they do believe in property rights and they want to engage in these agorism because of the government's infringement on our property rights, and they're trying to shield themselves or shield their property and their use of the property from the government. So that, I guess like any movement, there's going to be some confused thinking and maybe not necessarily a lot of unity in regards to what it actually all means.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and that's the problem of exponential growth. That's the problem of exponential growth of ideas and finding niche corners and places for people to hide. Something that I was discussing with Jason Bassler last week on the show is that we're experiencing something with the internet and in particular social media. It's regressing. When the internet started out, what we understand to be the internet, what most people commonly understand to be the internet. When it started out, it was little pockets of places where people congregated, where they began their internet day and ended their internet day. You know, you dialed in to AOL, and that was all you knew was what was inside the AOL world until somebody came along and they figured out, oh, well, your browser, you just type in a different address and it'll take you to some place outside of AOL, outside of one of their communities. And then after they figured that out, there was this great renaissance in ideas and information spread, and it lasted all of about 10 minutes before people started again creating little groups and factionalizing off into their separate little ideologies, and so now there's a regression of the web where information is becoming compartmentalized again.
Yeah, and then of course we've got the big 800-pound gorilla in the room with the big tech giants and their censorship. And they're trying to reinforce that. You know, they don't want people to engage in ideas that may differ from their beliefs, and they're trying to do that. They're trying to shut down conflicting views, shut down conflicting news stories that might not go along with the approved narrative. So, there's so much. It's two sides of the coin here. There's so much good that can come of the internet and just this unbridled amount of information at our fingertips, like you were talking about. But then it can also reinforce kind of people's echo chambers too. I mean, you can consider yourself really, really informed. I mean, you can spend hours and hours on the internet, consider yourself really informed and a big consumer of news, and never once confront an opinion or a story that goes against your prior beliefs. So you remain ignorant, but then you become more and more confident in your ignorance, and that can become a little bit dangerous too, because that can kind of push people towards the extremes a little bit more.
Absolutely, and it has to be very willful. And the reason I say that is because I have experimented with this. I've attempted to do it, to try to create an echo chamber, a place where the people that, I can log into my social media, the place that I go to talk to these people, and know that the people I'm talking to generally think the same way I do about the world. And it just can't be done on reading a book cover, on just reading a label on somebody's, the little, 240 characters, whatever it is. It's not enough. And so you go through and you grab all these people that you think that appear like they might be fit inside your circle of understanding and comfort, and they're not. They're actually these different people, and you find it out really quickly that they're, even when they claim to have the same ideology, that they're very much different in what they believe that ideology is so many times.
Yeah, and that you're getting to once you start scratching the surface, beneath people's 280 characters or whatever on Twitter, and you start trying to get to the root of the origin of their beliefs or the core of the beliefs and just the basic principles, sometimes you find that those are really lacking. And I think that goes towards a little bit towards, people are driven by emotions. And so a lot of times they will arrive at these just based upon their emotional driven feelings. Socialism just sounds good. It appeals to me because what does it mean to me? Well, it means free stuff. Who could be against that? So I think, and that's one of the reasons I created my website, erasethestate.com, is I write oftentimes about these basic core principles about liberty, about freedom, about free markets, and why they're so important, and why I believe them to be morally superior to the state and government intervention and everything. Because I think it's really important to refresh and ground ourselves in these basic principles so we can really strongly define our beliefs and communicate them and then they can stand up and withhold challenges.
And that's the trick, isn't it? Right? It's not to be able to say I am something. It's to be able to demonstrate you are something. It's that idea of living your reality and not just talking it. And unfortunately, we have there's a big problem with that in the social media because it is just talk. So you don't know how much is people just talking about what they do versus what they actually really do. You do a lot. You're prolific. You spend a lot of time writing. I want to talk to you about a particular article that you did here a few weeks, maybe 2 months back now. Get into it a little bit because I like the numbers in it. But what else are you working on right now?
Yeah, right now, I continue to produce content for erasethestate.com.
Yeah.
Actually, right now, I'm writing about an article about the theory of worker exploitation that socialists and Marxists try to use, to go against capitalism, justify socialism, and turn it around on them and show them that actually this kind of surplus value that they talk about is really just interest. The concept of interest. Valuing present goods more than future goods, and that what they call surplus value, even under a socialist regime of state-owned means of production, that surplus value would still exist, right? The difference between what workers are paid now versus what the revenue comes in for those goods that are sold in the future, that would still exist. The only difference is instead of going to the capitalist, it would then go to the state, to the bureaucrats. So, the Marxists try to argue that socialism would eliminate that exploitation, that surplus value, but it really wouldn't. It would just switch the recipients of it.
Well, yeah, and that's kind of the funny idea behind any of these sort of counter-economic, counter-capitalist ideas that I find just so silly because there's nothing different in what those socialists did, but they just gave it to different people. It's still capitalism. It's still economic activity. They just took all of the profits and the proceeds and gave it to the people that they wanted to. They're practicing capitalism with your money.
Yeah, exactly right. And then, of course, there's centralizing the decision making. Right, in a market-based economy, it's the consumers, it's us as consumers and our decisions on how we spend our dollars that's going to determine which people, which institutions, which companies benefit and profit, and then therefore can expand and accumulate more capital goods and means of production. But when socialism comes in, when interventionism comes in, then that power of the consumers who are making those decisions, that's taken away from us, right? Now the economy's scarce resources are being directed by the central planners, by the bureaucrats, rather than consumers.
And that's the problem. That's the problem across the board. And it's what's funny with these alternative ideas again is because there's nothing alternative about it. They're just switching the responsibility, or they're changing the tools that they're using, shifting maybe a function within or a tool within the greater idea of the economy. It's so weird to me that people can't see it. And I guess maybe I can't wait for this article that you just talked about, because I want to see how you go about the interest thing and how you go about explaining that to people, because a lot of people think that that's a theft of some sort, but it's not. It's the delayed return for not immediately receiving whatever it is in return that you put out. If you exchange some goods, you exchange a bunch of chickens for a cow, but the guy actually wants 50 chickens and you only have 40, so you make him give you 15 chickens at a later date. That's what interest is. And we got to go into commercial. We'll come back. I'll try to clarify that thought, and we'll move on to the next question. We're talking to Bradley Thomas right here on Toward Anarchy. Okay, towardanarchy.com. You're looking for October 25th. If you're not with me live, just click in the archive. It's right up there at the top. It says archive. Look for October 25th. You'll see Bradley Thomas as my guest. You'll see the link there to follow him on Twitter, as well as to visit the erasethestate.com website, and you can support him. You can buy his book, Tweeting Liberty, a great little book full of very powerful tweets, effective tweets. He's proven his effectiveness out there in the Twitter world and continues to every single day with the amazing things that he puts out. Just short, poignant, powerful little statements. I hate to keep picking on the agorists, but they brought it on themselves this week, and they're a perfect example of what we were talking about here. And that idea of interest being brought up and the confusion that surrounds it, I can guarantee you this is not one that I have experienced myself, but I just bet you pool enough agorists together, you find one. I don't know if it's half, maybe 30%. I don't know what the number is, but some of them are, you say interest, and they're going to say usury. They're going to throw that right back in your face. They're going to say something to usury. And, of course, usury is more of theft than we were talking about interest being, just a delayed return on your investment. And so, I can't wait to see this new article that you got coming out.
Yeah. But, I mean, you're really hitting the nail on the head. It's interest, the source of interest is really just our time preference, right? We have a preference for a good right now versus that same good, in the future. Try an experiment, right? If you know any kids, right, ask them, well, would you rather have one cookie now or two cookies in, say 3 days, and watch their wheels start to spin as they're contemplating that. Normally you would say, well, of course, what kid is not going to prefer two cookies over one cookie? But it's that idea of having to wait to get that larger reward. So that, that's kind of where the concept of interest is, a lot of those kids are going to prefer, hey, I'll even prefer one cookie now versus two cookies in the future, just because of that immediate satisfaction of those needs. And so that's really kind of what gives rise to interest, is that time preference innate in human beings of present goods, receiving something in the present, now versus in the future. That's where obviously where interest on loans comes about. You have a value, say you want to borrow $100 right now, and you're willing to pay $105 back in 6 months from now, for example, that $5 interest, because you value that $100 more than you value $105 6 months from now. So that's really what gives rise to interest. And that's what, when we talk about capitalists and they invest in labor and capital goods now, say they spend $1,000 on capital goods and labor now, in the anticipation or the hopes that they can generate, say, $1,200 in revenue by selling the finished goods 6 months or a year later. It's the same kind of concept.
It's the return on investment, the anticipated return on investment, the missing return on the investment that you made some time ago. These are all important factors of economics. We're talking about a lot of things here with Bradley Thomas. We will continue the conversation after the top of the hour break here on Toward Anarchy. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Republic Broadcasting Network, because you can handle the truth.
We are living in an artificially induced state of consciousness that resembles sleep. The poor and the underclass are growing. Racial justice and human rights are non-existent. We have been lulled into a trance. They have made us indifferent to ourselves, to others. We are focused only on our own gain. That is their primary method of survival. Keep us asleep, keep us selfish, keep us sedated.
And as always, towardanarchy.com is the place to follow along. You see my guest is Bradley Thomas, and we've been talking some economic stuff, but I want to jump into, there's a piece that you did here. Oh, I don't know. It's been a couple months now, I guess. It's been a couple months since the last time you were here. You did this piece that you were talking about numbers. You're talking about police. And this 80% number come up. 80% of criminal charges are for misdemeanors. And if you're at towardanarchy.com, you're on October 25th. That link is there to follow the story that Bradley wrote. And it just struck me. It's just instant that 80%. I mean, that's a huge majority of the interactions between police and citizens that are for nonviolent, no force needed, generally speaking, revenue generators in a lot of cases. And that says a lot to me about police and policing to people that want to know numbers and want to know the effectiveness of something and whether or not it's a valid thing that helps society or moves whatever it is forward. If it's policing or whether it's anything, any construct of ideas, if you take and analyze it and you look at the numbers and you look at the facts and you go, well, 80% of the time these guys are doing something that falls outside of actually serving and protecting anyone but their wallets and their masters. You with me on that one?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, this was really concerning and a little bit surprising when I saw just how big that number was. I mean, when you look at that, you really get the impression that the criminal justice system it's been turned more into a cash cow for extracting fines and penalties from peaceful citizens than an institution protecting citizens from the aggression of others. I mean, you look at these misdemeanors, I mean, they range from basic traffic stops for, a revoked license or expired registration. And then, of course, as I'm sure you're familiar with, the drug war, so many people getting arrested for possession of trace amounts of marijuana or drug paraphernalia, things of that nature. Basically, people minding their own business, literally, not harming anybody, not stealing from anybody, just basically not complying with all of the government's rules and regulations and restrictions. So then the police are coming in, and the overwhelming majority of the interaction between police and citizens is for these people who were not harming anybody. So that generates, I think, a lot more. Well, number one, the more interactions, the more opportunity for those interactions to turn bad, right, between citizens and the police. And then it also generates, I think, just greater mistrust between citizens and these officers who are supposed to be protecting us. They're more harassing us than protecting us. So I think that starts to create a lot more tension and mistrust between the citizens and the law enforcement officers.
Well, and they wonder why. I've had more than one cop ask me, and I've experienced it more than once, not personally myself, but with other people where the cop ask, why are you so nervous? Well, because an armed gangster just pulled up behind me with the intent to rob me because I haven't committed any crime.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And that very well could be the most dangerous, 2-minute interaction of your life.
Yeah.
You step out of line, you say the wrong thing, you make a sudden move when you're reaching for your license, and the cop gets nervous, what have you. Yeah, I mean, absolutely, we have every right to be nervous. Another thing I noted in that article, which was really concerning and again, kind of raised my eyebrows, is that a report from the Reason Foundation showed that 23%, basically 1/4, of those people born between 1979 and 1988 have been arrested. So that means they have an arrest record. So think about what that does to these people's livelihoods when they have to check that box when they're applying for a job, not to mention any of the fines and everything that they were strapped with during that arrest, the kind of financial straits they're put in. So, I mean, you have 1/4 of people in this age group walking around this country with an arrest on their record, and the majority of it is for people, again, peaceful people, not aggressing or harming another person. So just the widespread harm that's causing to peaceful people is very concerning and troubling, and that really was a big motivating factor of why I wanted to write this article.
Yeah, I see that there. previously 6.4% of Americans born before 1949 had been arrested. That's a small percentage, but then the 23% of those born between 79 and 88. And it's probably pretty crazy in there in between those numbers. That 30 years in between that number is probably pretty ridiculous too, because there was a number of things going on in that time period, the war and stuff like that, the war in Vietnam and things like that caused a lot of political unrest and created some of the laws and violations that are used today to create some of those victimless crimes, to lock some of these people up or to rob them, as it were. I think, and here's the problem with this. And so the act in and of itself is violent. The act of pulling someone over to enforce one of these political or social opinions is an act of violence itself. So you say that I have no right or no reason to defend myself from a police officer because he's pulling me over to give me a ticket. Well, I say to you that he's an armed robber pulling me over with the intent to extort me when I have violated no one else. And if I do not pay his extortion fee, the longer that I go without paying it and ignore his supposed authority, the closer it comes to the courts issuing a warrant and somebody coming to my door and killing me if I don't agree to come with them to face their judgment.
Yeah. My gosh, Michael, that's so well put. Also, I think it's interesting to note, we talk obviously a lot about, taxation being theft, but what about these fines being levied on these petty misdemeanors? That's another form of taxation, and de facto theft, of course. And really, it's a regressive form of taxation and theft because it's, typically more impact on the low income socioeconomic status that are being hit with these fines for these misdemeanors. And, it's another way for government to extract money from its citizens to fund government itself. In this case, it helps fund the court system, probation officers and so forth, all these government employees, all these government functionaries. And so much of it is being extracted from the low income population here. So that's just another, injustice, if you will. Basically they're fining these low income people so that they can finance the system that then pays for the people to go out and continue to levy the fines on these low income people. It's just kind of this vicious cycle, and the over criminalization of the U.S. society is really having these negative ramifications that just are going to keep compounding generation after generation.
Oh, and then the conversation at that point becomes, well, what did he do wrong that he had the police come? Whoa, back up. Wait a minute. He did wrong by whose opinion, by whose standards, and in what sense did he do wrong? Why? This question always comes up, why didn't he just comply? Well, why did he get pulled over in the first place? Why isn't that your first question out of your mouth when you're questioning what these police are doing on the streets? It's not, did he I saw a perfect video of this the other day, because you're not going to get me to defend policing, but you will get me to defend somebody who is defending themselves. So I can, as a logical principle, the individual, make a separation between the actions that put somebody in a situation and the situation itself. So let's take and set aside the fact that a cop shouldn't be there in the first place bothering someone, but now he is, and this person chases the cop. The cop is armed, pointing a gun at the individual. The individual chases the cop around with his hand behind his back, like he's got something behind his back, like he's good pulling. Chases you back and forth. The cop says, "Get away from me. Stay back. Get back. Take your hands out. Put your hands up." All this. And after 5 minutes of dodging back and forth, trying to avoid this guy, when he comes charging at him, he ends up finally shooting him. Okay, I get that he shouldn't have shot him in the first place because he shouldn't have been there in the first place. But I'm not going to say that this guy can't defend himself because I believe I should be able to defend myself against an unarmed person who's attacking me if I don't know they're not armed. And so I guess what happens is a lot of times is you try to take a reasoned approach to things and you get caught in the middle of trying to make an argument for something that you shouldn't have to make an argument for in the first place, and that's policing. There is no argument for policing that I can see that can be made that justifies the violence, the 1,000+ people killed every year extrajudicially, just to raise a little revenue to pay these people. That to me sounds like theft. It sounds like gangster activity. It sounds like just flat out. It's gangster-esque. It's just gangster activity to me. It's all I see is somebody telling me that if you don't do things my way, I'm going to kill you eventually.
Yeah, and the great trade-off that we're supposedly getting for all this policing and over-policing is that they are going to protect us from those who actually would do us harm, which they have a very poor track record of. I mean, look at any arrest rates for murders and significant violent crimes like that. There's a very low rate of them actually catching the people who are committing those violent acts that we want. If we are going to have a police force, these are the violent criminals that we want police out there catching. And when it comes to that, they have a very poor record, a very low rate of actually, catching those violent criminals. So, the trade-off is really getting imbalanced, where the harassment, the trade-off of putting up with the harassment for these nonviolent crimes versus the protection against the violent criminals is really tipping in the wrong way.
Well, isn't it just lazy work? Isn't that what the problem is with the whole idea of justice and actually investigating crimes? If these cops weren't out on the street spending 80% of their time trying to rob people for victimless violations of commercial codes, they might actually be able to solve a murder or two.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, they're just spread so thin trying to collect these fines and get, pull someone over because they got expired tags or something like that.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, there's actual victims being harmed, being robbed, being assaulted, being murdered. But meanwhile, the police are out there trying to fill their quotas for some speeding ticket trap where no one is really endangering anybody else on the road. They're just 5 miles over some random speed limit. So they can generate more revenue, but, catching an actual criminal doesn't generate a whole lot of revenue for them.
Well, when you call a cop, they show up to the scene of a crime 9 to 13 minutes after the fact. They're not there to stop a crime. That's why the idea of laws existing at all is sort of a silly notion. A piece of paper that tells you can't do something. No, I don't think that's what the law was really meant for. I think the law was meant for prescribing a punishment for violating a person or their property, not coming up with things to more ways to violate other people, I guess, through the system. It's such a weird thing to me because it seems so obvious to me that a victimless – I've asked this so many times before. Somebody will say something, well, what crimes would you have police not enforce? Well, all the victimless ones. Well, which ones are those? Those are the ones without victims.
Yeah, kind of answering your own question there. And we can also get back to just the incentives at play. I mean, because they are an agency of the state, of the government, their revenues are going to keep coming in regardless of their success rate of catching these actual violent criminals. There's no incentive system at play. There's no market mechanism in there that's going to reward a better performance at doing what they're supposed to be doing. You can't fire your local police department. You're just going to keep coughing up the tax dollars. People are going to keep coughing up the fines, for these minor violations, and they're going to keep getting their money year after year. And there's no really major incentive for them to improve their performance on what they're actually supposed to be doing.
So most people, I guess, they're not giving any critical thought to the things. I guess it just must be a thing, and we find ourselves in a low percentage existence, that we're just a small number of people who kind of get it. And that there's just all these other people out there who maybe they have the capacity, but they haven't turned their attention to it, and they haven't put any critical thought into what it is police do, what it is the state is supposed to represent, what it is justice is supposed to be for individuals. They have no concept of history. So, of course, they have no concept of what the law means within history. They have no concept of what policing actually is. We're told from birth to trust the guy in the uniform over there, that he's there to serve and protect us. And so many people never think beyond that. And so I guess they have childlike reasoning and existence within their reality. And it's just easier. I think most children would probably figure this out, even, to just go along with it and to get along.
Yeah, and there's a lot of just status quo bias. People are raised in, thinking about my children in particular. I mean, this is just normal to them, right? Because they don't know any better. Their kids, this is what they're brought up. This whole over-criminalization of the state and having to comply with every little, dotting the I's and crossing the T's on every little bit of paperwork for everything you do, or else you can get fined and punished. Multi-trillion-dollar deficits by the federal government. That's just normal to them. Huge Leviathan welfare warfare state. That's just normal to them. So this is their baseline that they're accustomed to. Speaking of children today. So then what happens? The next generation comes up, and that Leviathan has increased from that baseline a bit more, and the cycle continues, and we just have this acceptance of, oh well, this is just how it is. Let's maybe have some arguments around the margins about how much more, at what rate the Leviathan is going to grow. But we just accept that it's already this big, it's going to continue to grow. Let's just maybe have some debates over maybe trying to slow down that rate. But folks like you and I are kind of stepping out of that bubble and recognizing, hey, wait a minute, there's a whole different concept to be discussed here, and that's, what about doing away with the state altogether? Let's question the moral legitimacy of the state itself. I mean, we talk about it all the time. Again, the very funding mechanism that the state uses is taxation. I mean, that's theft. Theft at worst, extortion at best, right? And that's illegitimate, unjust. Yeah, right. Yeah. Right. Exactly right.
Justify everything else you do, after you justify the theft. And we'll be right back to wrap it up with Bradley Thomas here on Toward Anarchy. Here, as I choke to death, just a truly great conversation, as always, with Bradley Thomas. TowardAnarchy.com. October 25th is the date you're looking for. The links are there. You can follow Bradley on Twitter, as well as visit the EraseTheState.com website. And just a pleasure to have you back again and to talk to you about some of these things. It's kind of scary thinking about where we're headed right now in America. Just we were talking about the children and just sort of the programming and everything that goes into them, and it's even worse now. My wife works in the public education system, and she's had time outside of the public education system and experience and influence by someone like myself, and so she sees the failures and the things that are going on within the system, and it's worse. It's worse than it's ever been, and they're scrambling for so much control at the education level right now with COVID and the new normal that we're approaching. So the whole thing's really scary about how programmed the next generation will be.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we were talking about, just elevating that baseline. For what's an accepted status quo, and really what's been troubling to me is just how we're being conditioned to be suspicious of others. They're telling us anytime you leave your house, oh my gosh, that person walking down the sidewalk, they could be someone carrying a deadly virus, so you need to keep your distance, you need to keep your mask on, and that's just really, really pretty frightening, just how they're conditioning people to look at their fellow citizens with suspicion like that, and I think part of the result is that they being the state, want to be that the people that come in and try to comfort you and say, oh, you need to be suspicious of all your fellow citizens, but if you just listen to us, then you'll be safe. And they're just trying to accumulate more and more power that way by trapping us in our fears.
Well, it's a natural tendency, I think. It's the problem with government. It is in itself a failed ideology, a failed way to try to manage a larger existence, a larger society, but they keep clinging to it. How come? I don't know. One question, I guess we're coming to the end of this, and just to end on such a philosophical question, but how come they don't see it? It just doesn't seem like it should be that hard to break out of the trance, to wake up. But man, some people are snoring and maybe took some PMs before they went to sleep because damn, they ain't waking up.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's one of the downfalls of making such a prosperous society that America was when it had a much freer market, is that people start to live very comfortable lives. And so you get in that comfort zone, you're comfortable day to day, you've got all these creature comforts and everything. There's less urgency to try to look for, things that are causing you problems and pain and everything in your life. And these creature comforts, I think, kind of mask a lot of these intrusions the government is taking in our lives. And plus, there's kind of that dichotomy between people yearning for freedom versus yearning for security, or at least the appearance of security, the promise of security. There's a lot of people that are afraid of the risk that's involved with living a free life. They want to have someone there that they feel that's going to take care of them, that's going to take care of their health care if they get sick, and take care of their kids and educate their kids so they don't have to worry about it, and keep them safe from viruses spreading and everything. So it's really kind of that tension there between people wanting to be free and wanting to at least feel like they're being protected.
It's the abuser's dream relationship, isn't it? Because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about people who act the way somebody who's in an abusive relationship, somebody who's being constantly gaslighted. I know people hate that term, and a lot of people don't even understand what the term means. But the simple fact is they are. We're being told we're crazy, that we're wrong, when it's government that is responsible for all the craziness and all the wrong. It's there are individuals at those cores, but I challenge anybody to suggest to me a problem in the world that I can't point at government and say that it's government's fault or that government made it worse.
Yeah. Well, and how many problems has government really solved for you? And it just getting close to this election, I'm seeing, just kind of some of the terminology you see, for example, coming out of like Joe Biden a lot is talking about trying to heal the soul of the nation. And that's just, to me, that's chilling. My soul does not need to be saved by some 47-year lifetime DC bureaucrat. That's a whole, that's just a whole different level of just desire for control. To think that your very well-being and soul and just spiritual well-being depends on who the president is. That's just really frightening.
Yeah, dependent on the state. What a scary, scary idea. Thank you, my brother. You are a great friend, and I appreciate you hanging out with me again. I'll have you back again real soon, and you take care. I'll catch up with you soon, all right?
Thanks so much, Michael. Anytime.
You bet, brother. We'll be right back on Toward Anarchy.
You are tuned in to the Republic Broadcasting Network. Visit our website by going to republicbroadcasting.org.
But Mr. Michael Storm. Storm, that store is violating my rights. Yeah, well, that sounds like a place you might not want to go. Or if you're already there, maybe you want to leave. Yeah, well, I'm still here. TowardAnarchy.com. That's the place to follow along, keep up with the conversation every week. Not just the great conversation I just had with Bradley Thomas. And not just great because without even prompting or prodding him, he absolutely backed up what I was saying about the agorists, and that's coming from a learned, educated economist. I mean, somebody who is not, and he's not like a Keynesian or something like. So he's not even like a fake economist. He's not like a book economist. Just trying to dazzle people with the properties of M1 and M2 and M3 and how many M1s it takes to get to C2. That's how many chickens it takes to buy a cow or something. I don't know. I'm just trying to dazzle you, baffle them with the BS, as the phrase goes. No, he's an actual economist. He's an Austrian economist. He's somebody who's studying the facts, the science, not the speculation of economy, not the ideas of what you can do within an economy, but what economy actually is, what the human action is between individuals that are conducting transactions. And it's not even just between individuals. It's all human interaction. It's interaction with our own time, with our own minds. It's interaction with the world around us, whatever it is, because those things all require an evaluation of our participation in it and what we get back out of it, whether we know it or not, subconsciously. You watch it in play in children. There was, in our conversation, there was some sort of reference to that in the deciding between one cookie now and two cookies at a later date. You can tell the better the better understood, the person with the better understanding, the child in this case, with the better understanding of the ideas put forth to him when he accepts the delayed return. That's not to say that when you don't accept the delayed return that you have an absence of understanding of what the value of it is, but there's, I think that it shows that there's more of an emotional understanding about getting the cookie now versus the two cookies later, because for whatever reason, the more complicated older individual may consciously try to weigh things like, well, I might be dead in a month, so I won't be here in 2 months to collect on two cookies, or 3 months to collect on two cookies, whatever the example was. I think it was 2 cookies in 3 months that he said. But I think that, so when you're not talking about children, when you're talking about supposedly learned, grown, educated adults, individuals who can make their own decisions, and they still decide to take immediate gratification over a greater gratification, maybe they have a reason, but maybe, just maybe, they just might not understand the transaction and what it means to them. Maybe the cookies and adults thing doesn't work. Maybe that's part of the problem. You need something more important to adults. I don't know what that would be. Food is just always a good example. If I'm not hurting for food right now, if I'm not hurting for money right now, if I'm not hurting for okay, here's one. I'm not hurting for the investment of my comic books right now. I sent comic books away to be graded months ago. I've been without my property just to have it on the off chance come back. I invested money. And I'm hoping for a future return on that. One that I have there's no certainty whatsoever. I have no idea what the books will come back graded. I have no idea what the value will be I have no idea when they will come back to me, because of the fact that there's only a couple of companies that really do it, maybe 3 that grade comic books across the entire, I'll say nation, I won't say world. I could lack knowledge of somebody else who's doing it, but comic books are definitely bigger here than anywhere else. Yeah, I think that's safe to say. Yeah, American audiences eat this stuff up. What was the point, though? It was just about the general idea of investing in my future and taking something that I know, something that I love, something that I could use now, but don't necessarily need. And see, that's the difference, okay? And I think that maybe a child wouldn't understand that difference, and maybe the cookie is just a little bit too simple. But just think of it in terms of food. I don't need to eat today, but you promise to feed me more later on down the road if I just wait. That's the only term, is that I don't eat the food you have today. I'm not starving. That's a different conversation. That's a different topic. I'm not starving. So I don't need it now. I can put off delayed gratification and receive more later. That's a good deal. That's a good adult deal if you do it with somebody you can trust. There's a problem here that I have in this whole thing. I really didn't want to spend a bunch of time on this necessarily, but it's all part and parcel of the conversation, right? This is what happens when I'm talking to these people about their position, about the things that they hold true in their value system, whether they call themselves an agorist or something else. Whatever it is that they actually believe it, and it's this idea of, I mentioned it earlier, that you do for yourself something, that you extend yourself a courtesy or a right that you don't extend to other people, or you don't follow it through logically, principally, and that bothers me. So if you're in this case, and we'll just wrap up this conversation on this and just move on I don't even care. I'll just try to find something else to talk about, because I don't want these people to hate me. I want them to reevaluate what it is they say in light of what it is they do. It's been the entire point of this all along. But and this is the point, if your vision of a free market economy, you say you support free markets, you say you support voluntary interaction in those markets, but if it has caveats, if it has exceptions that others would have to accept, either by omission, by your saying, just that your group of people saying that these things aren't valuable within the system, even though somebody else might use them and find them valuable, by omission or by force, then you're not a free market proponent, and that's all there is to it. And to give you an example, I'm talking about the things that come to issue here every time. I'm telling you the things that keep people from freedom, that keep us all from liberty, is the lack of economic understanding and the lack of legal understanding, and how those things apply across the board with the state and without it. Okay? So this idea of things that you can't omit or exclude by force or by definition, by saying that those things don't work within our system, things like incorporating or licensure, and none of these things are involuntary actions. It's not what I'm talking about. These are voluntary actions, people coming together to say, okay, this group goes out and spends its time. This is what it does. It goes out and it looks at these other groups, these other people, and it judges the way they do things, and it provides me, the consumer, with data to make my opinions, make my decisions based on their understanding of the data. And they've given them a license. They said, we license this person, or we even the Better Business Bureau is a little bit closer to something. It's like a stamp of approval. It's like saying, okay, this voice, this market-chosen authority that exists out there has given its approval of these people. A perfect example, again, are in the comic books. God, I just love how this stuff just happens and works, and it's why economics is real. You don't have to think about it. It's a reality. I could send my comic books to any one of these groups that does this grading, but I chose a particular one because it's an authority, not on grading, but it was an authority on collectibles in general, across the board, and in particular signatures. Okay, so there are several comic books. There's comic book companies that grade comic books. There's PGX. They're a low-end alternative that does good work. They're fine. They're just not considered the better options in the market, and they don't charge necessarily any less or take any less time to produce the same work. So there are two other market players. There's CGC, and that's the gold standard in grading comic books. But there's another player. That player is CBCS, and that player is backed by, has the stamp, the licensing, the use of the name of Beckett. And if you're a collector, you know that the name Beckett means collecting. Okay, they are the gold standard in originally, baseball card collecting and information and grading and pricing, valuation, opinion of those things in the free market. Beckett. So I chose CBCS to send my comic books to them. They're not the gold standard of comic book grading yet, but they are the gold standard of collectibles in general, and they have that license, that seal of approval. So these things, if you're omitting, again, this is what I'm talking about, omitting these things or forcing these things out of your so-called free market position, money, currency, the use of any of them, including fiat, you're not a free market proponent. Hierarchies, private property, insurance, incorporating in and of itself, all of these things are economic functions, free market tools that would exist without the state and would exist in much better, more organized, more reliable ways without the state, because the state fails at everything that it does except using force to make people follow what it does. That's the only thing that the state is good at. The only thing. I hate the losing arguments, and it's hard to describe them because people make them all the time, and they make them because they're making false paradigm arguments. They're arguing from left and right or black and white when everything is in the middle and it's gray. And so it's really, really frustrating. And you would think that I'm the guy that's supposed to see things in black and white, right? But I don't. And it's the weird position that I find myself in all the time as the enemy, right in the middle, caught in the middle between these useless ideas tossed back and forth as if they were new, as if they were different, as if they were anything other than what they are, is just people with a lack of understanding about one thing, running to people who enforce or reinforce their lack of understanding of that thing by their own lack of understanding of it. And damn, that is a smackdown on your ideals if you are, in this case, the agorist, walking around espousing leftist ideology and don't even realize it. Don't even have a clue that you're doing it. It's the same old story, isn't it? It's the promise. Zuckerberg made a promise this week. He promised to make less restrictions on your content posts after the election. Isn't that good to know? That you can't talk about politics unless it's politics they approve of until after the time to talk about politics has passed. I guess. And the question about the individuals and when you start looking at it from the individual perspectives and the ideas that they claim and the labels that they slap on themselves, and if you ignore labels, you think labels aren't important. Boy, this is the time I'm telling you that they're more important than ever, because in this reality where you only have 2 seconds to evaluate something as it scrolls past your screen, you you better have something to evaluate it on. You better have some principle for your foundations, your understanding of the world. Otherwise, just keep scrolling and shut up. Man, I can't even suggest that one enough. This is true in life. Just if it's not your wheelhouse, keep rolling. Just keep going on down the road. Don't try to step in and make yourself heard when somebody doesn't want to hear you anymore, or when the worst is the repeated argument. We're still talking about these damn agorists. It's so frustrating because they're a microcosm of the greater problem of understanding and believing and reconciling your words with your actions. So it's hard for me not to pick on them. I don't want to even do it. I just really don't want to do it because they're not my enemy. And that was never the point of it. I don't want agorists to be mad at me. I just want them, and I want everyone to understand the difference between the things that they're saying and the things that they're doing. The running off and hiding and creating the echo chamber for yourself. The same people that would tell you not to do it in real life. They tell you not to do it on the internet. Don't surround yourself with people who have the same ideas with you, but they'll try to in their reality. So the reality of the agorist is that he wants this isolated existence away. Stop playing! That song gets me every time. It's just, I don't know, it's that drum beat. It really is. I just like that. It's just dun, 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 dun. I don't know. It just gets me every time, and I want to hear the whole thing. I hope I sound like it to myself, so I don't doubt that it does sound like it to somebody else. But I don't want it to sound like I'm ranting, because I'm not really. Ranting, it tends to assume that there's no logic, no reason, no coherent thought or train of thought that can be found throughout the rant. But that's just not true of my passionate, I guess, approach and my position on these things. It's about being principled. It's about being able to answer any single question of morality or principle when it comes to the dealings of the world, when it comes to me and my understanding and the way I would treat other people and deal with them in the world. I don't need another pocket. I don't need another definition. I don't need another safe space for me to run to try to find people of a like mind. I'm not afraid to sit here and tell you that I am an anarchist, that I am a capitalist, and that those two things describe anything you need to know about me if you believe those things for what they are. Anarchy, me being the sole decider of me, and capitalism being the sole decider of my property. That's it. If we have those understandings, you and I, we have an understanding of the world, because we will let each other function within that world so long as the things that we do not violate each other's person or property. We can be offended by each other's opinions. We can be offended by each other's actions and the results of those actions, but still accept them as a reality and not have anything to say or do or be involved with the other person in any other way than in a positive way, because those what I perceive to be negative action or negative consequence didn't involve me, and it didn't involve me involuntarily. That's it. It was maybe that was a really long way to say it, but I think the core of it was there. Anarchy, I own myself. Capitalism, I own my property. That's the conversation. We'll pick up the conversation again next week. I didn't have the book to give away. I didn't give away the book, so I'll have a couple to give away next week. Brushfire, the thriller books to give away next week with our author, Matthew Wojtecki, right here on Toward Anarchy. We'll see you then.
This is RBN, the Republic Broadcasting Network.